The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
It's part two, you guys. Today, we're talking about part two of sex trafficking / exploitation. Today, we are on part two of this series. What is the origin of it? What is the lure that most unsuspecting youth and adults into the game of trafficking? How do they get in it? How easy is it to fall into the traps of exploitation? Who here has wondered how pornography influences the trafficking market? How do we continue to protect our children from this? For the ones struggling to get out, how do we promote an avenue of escape? This is from the National Center of Sex Exploitation. You need to go to their website. 47% of the women reported that their intimate partners physically, sexually, verbally, and financially abused them. 23% were coerced into prostitution by their boyfriends. 2% of these women also reported being sexually assaulted, or propositioned by even members of the law enforcement community. Notice I said 2%. More than 50% of women reported experiencing violence from sexual buyers, including being stabbed, cut, raped, gang raped, raped at gunpoint, forced to engage in degrading sexual acts, choked, strangulation, beating, kidnapping, stalked, held with a gun to their head, tied up, tortured, beaten with objects, baseball bats, crowbars, and run over. I read on the website, one woman stated, "I probably figured I should have been dead at least 10 times. Oh, there's many more statistics, but we'll talk about that later. What do we have in place already when victims are ready to get out of the trap? Well, I think I have that resource. Y'all ready? Let's talk about it. Mentorship moments.
Sometimes you just gotta make it happen. Gonna make it happen. Gonna make it happen. Just make it happen. Just make it happen. Just make it happen.
What's up, everybody? I'm back. I told you there was going to be a part two, which I've been trying to make it part one, but I'm so glad that our guest before handled her business. But I have been dying for a few years now to keep my promise of getting this message out with her. This is Dr. Stephany Powell from the National Center of Sexual Exploitation. But there's so much more. I'm going to read her bio. I'm going to brag on her a little bit, and then we're going to get down to business. All right. Dr. Powell retired from the Los Angeles Police Department as a sergeant in charge of a vice unit. Dr. Stephany Powell's unique insight into the world of sexual exploitation and trafficking, gained through 30 years with the LAPD, has made Dr. Powell an unparalleled choice to lead Journey Out in 2013, formerly known as the Mary Magdalene Project. Journey Out assists victims of human trafficking in finding their way out of violence and abuse due to sexual exploitation or forced prostitution. In 2020, here's where it gets big, she joined the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, NCOS, as Director of Law Enforcement Training and Survivor Services. She is also the Law Enforcement Human Trafficking Training Consultant for Sail Our Way Foundation. Dr. Powell's passion and expertise in this field has translated within the last 4 years into new policies with the Los Angeles Fire Department. This is awesome. And a national message in the school industry. She has led education and awareness workshops to various audiences of law enforcement, prosecutors, and communities throughout the country and internationally. Dr. Powell has spoken before California Congressional Legislative Committees in the state capitol and addressed the Texas Legislative Black Caucus in Austin, Texas. Since 2013, she has educated over 8,000 people. 8,000 people, is that right, Doctor?
Yes, sir.
Wow. She has received numerous awards and recognition from Los Angeles County and city officials, as well as the women of the NAACP and Masonic organizations. Dr. Powell is clearly the recognized expert on the subject of human trafficking. Additionally, she is an adjunct assistant professor of behavioral science at Los Angeles Trade Tech College. Dr. Powell's expertise on the subject of race and law enforcement has been showcased in documentaries, local newspapers, and magazines. She was most recently has also been featured on HLN Chris Cuomo for her expertise in human trafficking. She recently authored a human trafficking workbook for teens. I can't wait to go into that. My Choice, My Body, My Rules. Her workbook is currently being used on a national, international level. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you, I'm the only fan in the audience, Dr. Stephany Powell. Hey! Oh, man. Look, hey, guys, listen, when I tell you what this show Mentorship Moment is about is bringing the heat to uplift our community, you know, there are some outer social things that are going on that we can't control right now. But there are still things going on in our community right now that we still need to fix. Because when all those social issues are gone, we are still going to be dealing with drugs, crack cocaine, prostitution, gang violence, you name it. It's still going to be here. So we're going to address the undercurrent as it's still going to be here, okay? All right. So, Dr. Stephany Powell, is there anything you'd like to add to your repertoire? Because I've seen you get awards. I've been watching you for years. I've been fiending to get you in this format. Anything else you want to add before we start asking you questions?
Sir.
Did I lay you out right?
No, sir. I think you got it just right.
All right. I really tried to take care of my guests. I was looking through the site for the National Center of Exploitation, and I was just blown away. You know, you tend to have like bullet points of subject matter, and then you go to a website that's just so like intense and involved in the things that, you know, I had to call you. I'm like, hey, can we talk about this? I know you're big time, but can we talk about this? Man, she can talk about it all. And I want to get this one out of the way first because I'm a man, and we as men, we tend to view things and learn things differently, and we tend to mansplain stuff. You know how we do. And I want to get it like straight from the horse's mouth. Back in the day, you know, and we're talking about pornography, you know, I was exposed to porn. You know, as adults, we're all exposed to pornography. And the mentality behind the pornography was like, oh, it's nothing. It's just something to get me like aroused. I try to keep it real in the show. It's nothing. But then I saw a documentary like years ago. I think it was called Surviving Porn. And they were talking to one of the a female and a male on their journey. And I was shocked. Stephanie, I was like, Doc, I was like, oh my God, I felt like sick inside that all those years behind, catching the quick flickers, there's nothing wrong with it. These people were victims. All right. The correlation between pornography and human trafficking. Can you talk about that extent? Just let us have it, because I've got the guests here. It's time to be educated, you guys.
You know, one of the things that the National Center on Sexual Exploitation is really trying to educate as well as drive legislation and policy for people to understand the harmful effects of pornography. One of the things is the fact is that it can be addictive. And in listening to some that have been addicted to pornography, they talk about that one thing may have caused an arousal, but then it just continues and they start to go down this rabbit hole. So then they might be watching something where the people are starting to get younger, or they're watching something where somebody may be getting choked, and then that's not enough. Let me watch something else. And it really can affect their relationship with people. It can affect their relationships with, their significant others. It really can. It's like smoking. You know, if we know that smoking causes lung cancer, then we really need to understand the effects of pornography and how it can affect people's lives in a negative way, especially when they become addicted to it.
So you feel, and I agree with you, by the way, but I got to ask these as devil's advocate, that it runs the same course of addiction as a drug addict, as smoking or a narcotic. I mean, I believe you just said it. It's almost like you start and you get your arousal, and you go back, oh man, what did I just do? And you feel like okay, forget about it. But then you keep watching it for satisfaction, and you're never really satisfied. And talk about the effects, before we get into the trafficking, the effects of damaging relationships continually watching pornography.
Well, here's the deal, and especially when you talk about younger people, right? So it's, I was watching a show with Lisa Lynn on CNN, and they were talking about pornography, and I thought it was pretty interesting, but it made sense that young people will watch it and determine that that's the way sex is supposed to be. Sex is supposed to be rough. Sex is supposed to include choking. The problem is, and especially if you're talking about heterosexual relationships, is that now the young women are thinking that's the way it's supposed to be.
I've noticed that too.
Right? And so, I mean, we really need to take a look at it. We really need to take a look at the demand. And that's the one thing that the National Center on Sexual Exploitation is looking at, and challenging the fuel on demand, as well as social media outlets as well. And I'll just give you an example. So now we know that the kids are, all home, being
Pandemic.
homeschooled, right?
Yep.
And so now they get these Chromebooks from Google, right? And so now they're in the search, and something pops up. That may, 13-year-old boy, something pops up where it might be, a woman half-dressed, let's just say. They go down the rabbit hole. That rabbit hole will take them right into, into the porn sites.
Man. It used to be years ago. I mean, just keeping it real, it used to be when the internet really first started booming, they had this thing called, you can only click here if you're 18. They don't even have that anymore. I don't want to lose sight of that. If you guys want to call in, and I have the good doctor here, because we're going to be talking about a whole lot in a short period of time, you can call in at 323-815-4204. That's 323-815-4204. Our rabbit hole in the 70s and 80s, we saw a magazine on the floor, right? It was like, whoa. And then there was the end, then you had to throw it away real quick. And then they had the censorship. But now people can just click on they used to be paid sites. Now it's free, and these kids can get into it. How does that correlate into our kids getting caught up, our youth group getting caught up in the trafficking issue?
So here's the disturbing part is that social media is that place where everybody can meet, yes. Right? And for kids, they don't see that as they're being a stranger. And so nobody's a stranger on social media. It's everybody's friend. You ask a kid, who are you talking to when you're playing a game? And they'll say, I'm talking to my friend. Who's your friend? Johnny. They don't know Johnny.
Right.
They just assume because they're on social media that it must be a friend. Yeah. And so what happens is that contact can be made through your sites such as Twitter or Facebook or TikTok or some of these others. And so then they reach out to your child, right? And they have this conversation where they may think that this person is a child as well. But it's not. And so they might ask them for things like, show me a picture of you in your bikini, right? And then it leads to more than just the bikini shot. And then when they send that shot that might be exposing genitalia, then it becomes, send me more. I'm going to tell your parents what it is that you're doing.
Wow.
The other thing is that some of these pornography sites, what also happens is there could be a rape of a woman, mm-hmm. and it gets uploaded to one of your bigger porn sites, such as maybe Pornhub or MindGeek or some of the other ones. It takes a lot in order to get those things down. Why should it take so much to get something down when you were raped, right? So one of the things that the National Center on Sexual Exploitation is looking at is something called the Earn It Act.
The Earn It Act.
Earn It Act. And so just to put it just slightly, what it is for instance, let's say, and not that you would do this, but you exchanged child pornography with a neighbor.
I wouldn't do that. No.
I know.
I know.
You two are going to jail.
Okay.
But if it's uploaded to some of your social media sites, they're protected. So the Earn It Act is looking at holding social media accountable.
Are you saying there are policies already in effect or are policies on the way?
It's on its way.
Okay.
So pay attention to what's going on. You guys have my my email address. Email me.
Okay.
And we'll tell you exactly what legislative bodies you need to get in touch with, because we really need to see this thing pass and to hold them accountable.
You know, somehow I had a feeling she was involved. I'm telling you, we met years ago, and I tried to, I'm just blown away. Thank you so much. You know, we're going to go into the adults. Well, no, I want to talk about sexual abuse leading into that too. But I want to talk about your career, how this superhero evolved into Dr. Stephany Powell, you know, because you've been in like law enforcement with the LAPD, a legend, for 30 some odd years, you know, and you know, I'm flattered because I've kind of walked the same path in some instances, and just having you here with this expertise, I feel like I'm blessed. Tell us how your career led you into sex trafficking. You know, tell us about it. You know.
So I left as a sergeant, and I worked a vice unit. Mm-hmm. And the idea when I was working vice, and now keep in mind, I've been retired for about 7 years now. The idea was that people were there by choice, regardless of whether it was a minor or it was an adult. What I found through the arrests that I made, that it clearly was not solely by choice, that there were push factors. So the push factor could be pimps. The push factor could be poverty, right? Mm-hmm. The push factor could be being part of the system, meaning either the juvenile justice system or foster system, just the various systems. Okay. So it wasn't always by choice. And so I started paying attention. And then I realized that, you know, a lot of the young ladies and men, primarily women we were arresting, they needed resources.
Thank you.
They needed resources. And so when I retired, I thought it was important for me to join a group, which ended up being the Mary Magdalene Project, and becoming the executive director, to be able to be part of that process. But before I left, what I would do is, if it was a situation where I had a choice of making that arrest or not, is I would actually call the Mary Magdalene Project in order to have them help me with the resources that I need with that individual, whether it be getting them back home because, you know, a pimp had them, or whatever it may be, just getting that resources to them. So that's how I actually segued from retiring LAPD to going into this advocacy portion of my life for victims of human trafficking and sexual exploitation.
Here's what I like, and with thousands of others that I've worked with, they see their arrestees as, number one, human, and then when you dig a little deeper, they're victims, all right? And she's like made it a cause to take care of them on the post then also. That's huge, and you're more free to do so than the 8 to 10 hour, 12-hour shift, right? That's amazing. Superhero, you know? So let's talk real briefly. How did it go from Journey Out to the national scale? How'd that happen?
Wow. Wow. Doing shows like this. No, you know, I think what drives me is my passion. Okay. So I'm extremely passionate about what I see is happening to especially our young girls of color. And just getting out there, it's like screaming from the rooftops. I was thinking when I was driving over here, you know, what it is that drives me. And what drives me is knowing this information and having to get it out. So everywhere that I went, I would talk about it. I've written about it. And one thing has kind of led to another, and the National Center on Sexual Exploitation actually saw me in Washington, D.C., and we were speaking on the Hill, and they were like, you need a national platform.
Yes.
So Here I am.
This is so awesome. This is so awesome. Okay, now back to focus. I have to celebrate our Black excellence. You are Black excellent. I love it. You're excellent, period. All right. So I want to move into the victims of sexual abuse at a young age, or abuse any kind of way that demoralize them to a point where they fall into the traps of human trafficking. Can you speak on that?
So when you think about it, one of the stats talks about the average age of entry for human sex trafficking is between the ages of 12 and 14 years old. Mm-hmm. There's some statistical data out there that says for African American girls it's age 11. Mm-hmm. I think what people need to understand is that it's not like the movie Taken, that 9 times out of 10 it's based on some type of relationship. So that could be where it's somebody that they feel that they have fallen in love with, but it could also be a family member as well. So I know when we were at Journey Out, one thing that we noticed is that about 80 to 90% of our clients were molested as children. And so when you are forced into sexual acts at a very young age, your worth starts to deteriorate, right? And you start to feel like maybe this is all I'm worth, and I don't have the ability to say no. So there's no boundaries.
So in essence, you become more of a submissive person, or you start to begin to become a pleaser because that's all you may know.
Absolutely. And then if you are born in such a family where you're not receiving love, and we all need love, right? Yes. And love is also used to validate us. And so if you don't have love, you don't feel validated. So you go out and you start to seek it. Okay. Right? And so sometimes they're seeking it from someone who does not love them but sees them as a commodity. Okay.
And now we're talking about pimps. All right?
Yes.
Explain the pimp game, the pimp philosophy, and how they make this happen. Detail it from your experience.
So although I'm not going to say the name of the book, so I don't want to give it any credence.
Yeah, please don't.
But there was one pimp that said, if you can't find a weakness, you create one. Okay. So huge manipulators. So what they're looking for is that weakness. And what I want people to understand is that weakness is not created by people that are from single-family homes and those that are in the foster system or juvenile justice system. Yes, are those risk factors? Absolutely. But what people need to understand is this really could be anybody's daughter. And I think that that's really important. You have girls that are being recruited off of college campuses, right?
That had good parents in the home.
Yeah, supposed good parents, right?
Right.
And people need to understand that because they find that weakness. So one of those weaknesses could be poor self-esteem. You have low self-esteem, and you need someone to tell you you're beautiful, and they do. But then there's a price associated to that. So now I've got you so locked in, to loving me, that if you don't do what I asked you to do, I'm going to take that away. Okay. When you think of it in those terms, or when you think of it in terms of a domestic violence, and it takes 6 to 7 attempts to leave, that's the same thing that happens, unfortunately, in that relationship, that emotional bondage when it comes to human trafficking. So it's very complicated.
So abuse runs the same formula. We talked about domestic violence with the Genesis Center last week, and she said exactly that. I love this. I love this. What's funny, now I'm just being, I don't know if you were, but my parents spanked. They whipped me, switches, belts, whatever, and, it involved the spankings and stuff like that. I know that that's not the popular thing to do. I refuse to say whether that's right or wrong because my parents raised me right. I will never say, but there was always an explanation. But I always felt that doing that nowadays does start the trend of abuse to develop that inferiority complex, to find that sense of approval and love. What do you think about that?
So when you think about it, and gosh, if my brothers were listening, they're going like, okay, girl, you know what happened to you when you were acting up. Steve was no joke. But But, what we end up doing is that we start creating this idea that conflict is resolved through violence or hitting.
Thank you so much for saying that.
As opposed to having that needed conversation.
Right.
Right? and using it as a teaching moment. Now, look, that's easy to say right
Right,
now,
right.
but we've all been there, right?
lived
When the
it.
principal has called you from work, talking about, little Johnny's acting up again. Like, the last thing you're thinking about driving over there is having a conversation.
Right, right.
But you know that you need to, because it can be a teachable moment. So yeah, I that's how I see it.
What I've evolved to, and my brother Dean and I, we talk about this all the time, is encouraging our kids when they make a mistake. What would happen to me as an adult? I would get talked to. I mean, there'd be some sort of reprimand, but I'm not getting beat with a switch or a belt. We talk about what happens when life happens. And as far as building their confidence, I always tell them, hey, yeah, the monsters are out there, but you got a monster right here at home. I don't think our parents are telling our kids that, hey, if a bad guy comes to you, I will kill them. They're not going to, you know what I'm saying? We got to start doing that. Put that in their head. I know, but I digress. I want to continue. All right. I want to talk about law enforcement, your work with. Are you still working with law enforcement? And I especially want to get into some of the policies you work with, because there's so much to talk about within the fire department. Can you speak on that? We talked about some of those policies.
So let me go with law enforcement first of all.
Okay.
I think law enforcement has made great strides. They've come a long way.
Yes.
And now keep in mind, there's certain parts of the nation where they need to go a little further.
Sure.
But just having a victim-centered approach when it comes to victims of human trafficking, and not just the minors, but the adults as well. And that's huge, to understand how they got into these situations, why they will not leave, and why some will not report their pimps. And looking at it from a victim view, because if you were a victim of a robbery, you wouldn't be arrested for that.
True.
Right?
True.
And understanding along with that, because I think of rape, for instance. Sometimes when the girls are on the street and they get raped or sexually assaulted, they won't even report it because they feel that, one, they're ostracized by society, and who's going to care? So I tell a cop, who's going to care? And the officers having that mindset that, it doesn't matter where she was or what she was doing. She shouldn't have been raped.
Wow.
And that rape report needs to be taken.
And you've witnessed these success stories partnering up with law enforcement currently.
Oh, yeah. Law enforcement, I'm telling you, they've come such a long way. Yes. In terms of, like, they'll call and say, hey, I got a girl. Hey, Steph, I got a girl. Can you come and help me? She has such a, this is horrible what happened to her. And then them really wanting to go after the pimp, because they'll say, this could be my daughter,
Yes.
And so it's changed. It's changed where it's a victim-centered approach, because at the end of the day, officers should not be arresting victims of human sex trafficking. And what I'm also finding, which I think is pretty cool, regardless of whether they say I'm a victim or not, they still will help to find them services. Hey, I got a girl, she's not ready to get out, but I think she could benefit from your services. For law enforcement to be working that closely with a nonprofit, and it's not just them working with me, you're seeing this on a national trend of
Yes.
law enforcement working with nonprofits to help victims of human trafficking or those that are trapped into the life. As it pertains to the Los Angeles Fire Department, I had a conversation with their command staff and just, talk to them about human trafficking and what it was and that whole victim-centered approach. Because of the first responders, I feel that the fire department has kind of been left behind in that conversation.
I believe that.
But when you think about it in terms of first responders, they are going to be the ones that actually will be meeting these victims while they are in captivity, regardless of whether it's sex trafficking or labor trafficking.
Okay.
If they don't see the signs, they will inadvertently return that person back to their trafficker, as the uncle or as the boss.
What signs do you have them look for?
So they will look for things like asking them questions. They'll say, so let's say that they say they're on the street and they have a concussion, just as an example. And somebody will come up and say, I'm the uncle. Okay. There might be some things you might want to ask them to see if, is that really the uncle? Is that your uncle? What's your uncle's name? I want
to put this out to you guys. Have you guys, you parents listening, I want you to hear on some of these new key buzzwords and for pimp, uncle. I just had to interject to make sure they absorb that. All right, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and so, and then really finding out there really is no, true connection. And one was a perfect example as it pertains to labor trafficking. The RA unit ambulance, they transported a construction worker that had fallen on the job, and they took him to the hospital. The nurse keyed in on it because this guy was thin. He was not, he didn't look like a true construction worker. The person who was the boss would not leave his side.
This was a male, right?
Yes. When he finally left his side and they were able to talk to him, they realized he was a victim of labor trafficking. So the same thing would happen with sex trafficking victims, right? That uncle, or not leave, or that boyfriend not leaving their side, making sure and listening to everything that they're saying. You might look for things like branding. Branding is the tattooing.
Where do we see those tattoos?
Oh man, you could see they're on their faces. And so they usually equate with money. So it could be dollar bills. It could be a crown. It could have their pimp's name with the B word attached to it. So you kind of like putting things together. So there's not just one thing, but it's putting it all together. The person obviously being a little bit or extremely concerned of that person watching them.
Okay.
Right? And so once the fire department understood that, they realized they didn't have a policy on what to do if they identified someone who was a victim of human trafficking. So as a result of that conversation, Los Angeles City, and kudos to them, have a policy on what to do when they come in contact with a human trafficking victim. And then I trained their department.
So that's an interlinking to you, and it also links back to law enforcement, where we're all working as a team, as we always have been. But now, from what I'm hearing, this is just like amazing.
And the great part about it was that I made it very clear that one needed to be talking to the other.
True.
So what I didn't want to do is train up the fire department and say, hey, here's the number that you're supposed to call, and then you know what happens? They call that number, and either nobody answers or they don't know what they're talking about or whatever it might be. So I was very happy that they did that.
I told you guys, this lady is amazing. You're like a godsend. I'm so glad we're getting this information, because there are parents that don't, I'm not going to use the word ignorant in a bad sense. They think everything's okay with their kid, and they're not recognizing the signs of the tattoos and new clothes, all that good stuff. They're not recognizing it. Or family members or friends that just don't know that what their friend, male or female, is going through. All right. Now, touchy subject with the decriminalization of prostitution. It's just like weed. If we legalize it, there's no crime. How do you feel about that?
So I think people need to understand what total decriminalization means. What total decriminalization means is that nobody goes to jail. The prostituted person does not go to jail, which I don't have a problem with that. Check, that's great.
Okay.
But pimps and Johns or customers, they don't go to jail either.
Right.
So that's total decriminalization. A better model would be the equity model. And that model says that the prostituted individual does not go to jail. But yet, if you're buying or forcing someone into prostitution, you go to jail. And also what happens is that there are resources that are available for those that are ready to get out of the life.
Okay.
Total decriminalization, what that ends up doing is opening the doors for people to come into our community and to buy our girls. Because when you look at it statistically, there's an overrepresentation of African American girls in when you're talking about prostitution.
Yes, yes.
And so, who wants to open those doors? And some of those that are for decriminalization
You want to say something?
are coming from
You're being nice.
Are coming from a place of privilege. Bottom line.
Okay.
You know, they're coming from a place of privilege to say, hey, you know, basically this is what I want to do and I don't want to go to jail for it.
Right.
Those girls that are out there on the street, they don't have a choice. There's push factors. And it goes back to the push factors being poverty, something that might be pimp driven. You know, when you start talking about systemic racism,
Yes.
and the institutions that got them into that poverty level in the first place, it is going to affect marginalized people the most, and it objectifies them,
Yeah.
and it puts a price on their head. And so some of the people that are backing it, because it's a like everything else, it's a political issue. I think what it says too, especially when you're talking about African American girls, well, you're out there anyway. So here's what we'll do: we'll make it legal, so now you don't go to jail. My problem with that is put some of that effort into finding them sustainable jobs.
Right.
You know, for those that want it, for those that want to be educated, educate them. Don't say this is, so what you're telling them is this is the best it's going to get for me.
And that to me
For
is racism.
Yeah. I have
racist.
a problem. I have such a problem
I'm right
with
there
that.
with you, sister. I am right there with you. That is, it's slick willy racism. You know, it's the racism you don't see. You know.
And some people will say, well, it's going to make it safer for them.
No.
Let me tell you, I just came back from Nevada, where it's legal in some counties, right? And I'm sitting and I'm listening to these women that were part of this legal system. The things that they talk about in terms of the trauma, the sexual assaults that they endured, them being demeaned in those brothels, was the same conversations that I hear from women that are in a illegal system. The trauma is still there. So you're going to tell me, let's normalize this thing in order for women that look like me, that it be okay, and it's not okay. So people need to understand what decriminalization really is. I had a survivor who said that what it does is that it normalizes a living hell. And most victims of human trafficking are totally against decriminalization.
Man, amazing. Now you heard it from the expert. All right, we're gonna move on. I want, because we only have 7 minutes left. You know, all right, we need more time. I wanted to talk about when you're speaking of decriminalization. Someone had asked about SB 145 really briefly, and you told me that it was always been in the books. Can you just explain it? You don't have to give pros and cons, but
so from my understanding about SB 145, and I know there'll be thousands of people to correct me if I'm wrong. That whole issue of the age range with that 10-year age range has always been on the books. That's what needs to be changed.
okay.
The reason why they came up with SB 145 is because what they were looking at is that it had more to do with vaginal sex.
Okay.
Whereas they changed it because they saw that what it did was it was discriminatory toward the LGBT community.
Okay.
So that's from my understanding, that's what it was.
So good or bad, what you need to do is just do your research. Don't just go off a YouTube video for or against. You can formulate your opinion from the facts. I keep telling y'all this. I get in plenty of Facebook arguments. You probably know that by now. Now let's talk about you. Now, there's a book that you have out that I want people to know about. Can you tell us about that book?
So what I did was I wrote a workbook for prevention. It's geared toward middle school to high school and teaching about human trafficking and how not to get involved in it. But because we're dealing with teenagers, I think it's more than that. I think it's more about how to set boundaries, how to have higher self-esteem. Mm-hmm. And so that's what the book is geared towards. So it's a workbook for youth, and it also has a facilitator book. So it would be good for youth groups. It's also good for schools. Mm-hmm. And so that's what it's actually geared toward, the prevention of human trafficking, understanding that you have boundaries, that you need to set those boundaries, and you don't let anybody cross them.
Do you have a hard time when you're talking about your book or your lectures? Are there a group of an audience or a social group, church, whatever, that you have a hard time speaking to?
I don't. I think maybe it's my personality.
Yeah,
I don't.
You get in.
It's how you have to deliver it, right? So that people really understand that this really could be their daughter. To really understand that if you don't understand that, and if you don't have those conversations, guess what? Somebody else will. Right?
So you have 4 minutes left. Big question. So you have a person that's ready to get out, and they reach out to you. Can you explain for our listeners that could be dealing with this right now what that process looks like to find the way out?
I think that anybody that, if you have a family member, anybody that you know that's ready to get out of the life, you got to support them. You got to walk alongside them. You got to do it without judgment. There's organizations out there, especially in the Los Angeles area. If you're talking about youth, you're looking at Zoe International, Saving Innocence. If you're talking about adults, you're talking about CAST, you're talking about Journey Out. And if they call these organizations, what it does is that it helps people to walk alongside them. And the best thing about it, a lot of these organizations have people that have already walked that road, right? That has that ability to understand them. So they can help them with things like finding jobs, education, finding a place to live. And so that's really important.
I just want to make sure that there are resources, and I already knew she was going to give them out.
Sorry.
No, you got. I really want to thank you for. You said you had other things going on as far as podcasts or articles going on that you had. Could you tell us about that?
I have. There's 2 articles that are coming up. One of them is in a broader book that's going to talk about African American women or girls and adultification. How they are treated older than their years, right? And so therefore they lack the nurturing. And things to be aware of as it pertains to the education system. And then I have another article that's going to be coming out in the International Chiefs of Police magazine that deal with how vice units can really be a part of the reimagination of the police department in helping the African American communities as it pertains to quality of life issues.
Now that is real, tangible help. I love it. I'm going to challenge you. I really think you should kind of have your own human trafficking podcast. I think that would work. You can bring the best of the best along with the best and make it happen, Captain. How about that? You ever thought about that?
I'm just so shy. That would be so hard to do.
Oh, shy? Not with that smile. Man, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I'm hoping to partner with you as you progress and grow. Anything you need on my end, whatever, from my little bit of experience, I'm down, and I can probably get some more people that are down with that. It's really about bonding and building our community the right way. We got to fix some things in order for us to get better to fix other things. Guys, this is Mentorship Moments. Each one, teach one. Remember, I got a book too, Navigating Through the Valleys of Success, A Perspective in the Thick of It. You can get that on Amazon also. To find out more about me, go to www.cjffla.com, CJFF as in funkyfunky.com, or you can go to cleonjoseph.com. I want to thank you for joining our show. In 2 weeks, I'll be back again with some more trouble for you. We're going to make it lighthearted, but I may have to do another Part 3, because if you go to the website of the National Center of Sexual Exploitation, it is so involved, it will not let you out. It will give you no excuse. So please go in and look up the contact numbers if you need help. Let's talk. Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate you.
Thank you, sir.
See you in 2.
It happened. Gonna make it happen. Just make